I'm Ray Karp. This is your APTN News Brief for Wednesday, February 7th. We begin in northern Manitoba, a region hit with unseasonably warm weather, prompting some remote First Nations to call for a state of emergency due to disappearing winter roads. Sav Jonza has more.
Right now, the winter roads that have been completed are deteriorating to a point where one chief told me that driving on their winter road is like driving on a sponge.
4 First Nations in remote northern Manitoba are declaring a state of emergency due to the quick deterioration of their winter road network, the only way in or out of the communities by land. Relying on winter roads to receive fuels, food, and construction equipment has become difficult due to unseasonably warm weather. Close to 1,000 semi-truck loads of essential goods are delayed getting to the island lake communities of St. Teresa Point, Garden Hill, Red Sucker Lake, and Wasagamacq Ansinan nations because of the conditions.
It's just unreal how the climate has changed this year.
Charles Knott is the chief for Garden Hill First Nation.
We haven't gotten any loads in this year. Our winter roads are not even open yet. The winter road crew are still battling trying to open the winter roads. And I'm very concerned that I just got word from my community that we only have about a week left of our fuel.
Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kathy Merrick says First Nations peoples are feeling the impacts of climate change.
First Nations people are among the lowest contributors to greenhouse emissions in this country. Yet research shows they're among the most exposed to climate change and the impacts of climate change.
Her and the other chiefs have called on the province to declare a state of emergency to assist the communities.
They can no longer wait when it rains in February in this province. They need the help. They need the assistance now.
The state of emergency declaration comes a week after the same First Nations proposed a 252-kilometer all-season road to connect to Barons River First Nation. Sav Jonza, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A new review out of the Northwest Territories has outlined better responses to flooding, driven in part by the historic water events of 2021. The report recommends 16 areas for improvement to governments and organizations, from more planning for evacuees with addiction and mental health challenges to addressing delays in critical supplies, along with the need for more training. The review also revealed a gap between the public and governments as to how well the latter shared information with the former. For example, some evacuees assumed they'd be put up in hotels rather than an evacuation center. People also felt they could have been made more aware of disaster assistance. And hundreds were displaced back in 2021, flooding which caused more than $40 million in damages. To Ottawa now, where debate got heated this week over the Trudeau government's new First Nations Clean Water Act. But as Fraser Needham explains, things really intensified after the dramatic claims of one Conservative MP.
Water quality is a problem on many First Nations, and the proposed Bill C-61 is supposed to do something about that by protecting water sources, creating minimum drinking water standards, and providing sustainable funding for water quality on First Nations. During debate in Parliament on Monday, Saskatoon Conservative MP Kevin Waugh had this to say.
You know, the previous Conservative government left 8.5 years ago. We still have over 100 water advisories on First Nations. In my province of Saskatchewan, I've seen reserves burn down water treatment plants because this government has done little or nothing.
Waugh went on further.
The other thing, Madam Speaker, is these water treatment plants need education, and they need people on reserve to operate the water treatment plants. And that's part of the problem that we've seen with this government the last 8.5 years.
Indigenous Services Minister Patty Haidu responded.
Will Madam Speaker trust a Conservative member to blame First Nations people for burning down their own water treatment plants and not being smart enough to be able to understand how to operate those plants? That's the kind of paternalism, Madam Speaker, that led to 105 long-term boil water advisories. They just weren't worth investing in, I guess.
The Liberals have been criticized for failing to live up to a 2015 commitment to eliminate all long-term drinking water advisories on First Nations by 2021. According to the Indigenous Services Canada website, there were 28 long-term drinking water advisories in place on First Nations as of January 19th of this year. 5 of these were in Saskatchewan. Bill C-61, which was introduced just before Christmas, is supposed to bring the government closer to meeting this commitment. But Haider continued to take issue with WA's comments in particular on Tuesday.
Well, the implication that people would burn water treatment plants out of spite, out of anger at the government, out of a sense of, wanton destruction, I think, came through loud and clear in his comments. And I will just say that we see acts of arson in non-Indigenous communities as well. So there is a stereotype that somehow Indigenous people don't take care of the equipment or their housing or their community infrastructure, and that is a long-standing, very harmful and hurtful stereotype.
APTN News reached out to Kevin Waugh's office, asking him to provide clarity for his comments from the previous day, but did not hear back by airtime. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Still with federal politics, the subject of Indigenous knowledge was on the minds of the Standing Committee on Science and Research, discussing ways to best integrate it into government policy. And yesterday, that committee heard from 5 witnesses, including Lindsay Heller, an Indigenous fellow at Simon Fraser University. Asked for lasting examples of how Indigenous knowledge has been incorporated into research, Heller referenced medicinal applications.
There are a number of actively used therapeutics and anti-cancer medicines that were discovered, and I'm using air quotes for those that are sight impaired, by Western scientists, but were directed to those researchers by Indigenous people as plants. Pacific Yew, for example.
The Nunavut municipality of Pangnertung and Indigenous Services Canada have now entered into a partnership meant to provide supports to Inuit families. And according to the Arctic Children and Youth Foundation, programs like the Inuit Child First Initiative and Jordan's Principle have become crucial to many of those families. The $5.4 million Pangnertung agreement was negotiated under Jordan's Principle. It will enable the launch of a voucher program so families can purchase baby formula, diapers, and food for children under 18. On a related front, the federal government has announced a pair of initiatives meant to address rising rent and food costs. Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne said the feds will spend $5 million to help investigate grocery price inflation. Monies will support 6 consumer advocacy groups tasked with looking into higher prices and harmful corporate practices like shrinkflation, when a company shrinks the volume or size of a product, and skimflation, when businesses skimp on the quality of a product or service.
Projects that they will be undertaking are going to be all on grocery affordability. And they will tackle things, and I've been on this podium talking to you about 2 things that really concern me about shrinkflation and skimflation. How can we've seen that, and this is more and more prevalent in the marketplace, and I think it's more common than we would like to see and certainly believe, and therefore they're going to help us to make sure that we inform consumer and we tackle that.
Meanwhile, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland highlighted a roughly $99 million top-up to the Canada Housing Benefit. She also announced more money for low-income Canadians who rent, a benefit which since 2022 has delivered about $400 million in support to more than 800,000 people.
This benefit helps make rent affordable by delivering rent support payments directly to Canadians. The Canada Housing Benefit was launched in 2020 and has helped many Canadians since then. And today's announcement means that by 2027, 2028, this benefit will have helped make rent more affordable for over 300,000 low-income households.
The feds also announced $100 million in emergency winter funding to increase access to shelters across Canada to help warming spaces offer more services to more people. And that's your APTN News Brief for Wednesday, February 7th. I'm Rick Harp.